It is 10 o'clock, so I'm going to get started here. I'm going to start with Psalm 2. I'm going to just work my way through the Psalms that way, rather than try to figure out something. So I'm just going to read the whole thing. It's relatively short.
Okay.
Why do the nations conspire and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves and the rulers to take counsel together against the Lord and his anointed, saying, let us burst their bonds asunder and cast their cords from us. He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord has them in derision. Then he will speak to them in his wrath and terrify them in his fury, saying, I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill. I will tell the decree of the Lord. He will say to me, you are my son, today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage. Don't you just love this skinny little paper? Okay. And the ends of the earth your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron and dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Now therefore, O kings, be wise. Be warned, O rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear, with trembling, kiss his feet, for he will be angry and you will perish in the way, for his wrath is quickly kindled. Now, all of that negative, and it ends with, happy are all who take refuge in him. So, but the footnote said this is a Davidic, it's a royal psalm announcing, David as the king. And this footnote makes the point that every time in the Old Testament they use the word anointed, which means a Messiah, they're talking about a current king. Nowhere in the Old Testament was it ever written, we've overlaid new meaning on it, but at the time it was never written in terms of a coming Messiah. So is that Maisie, or do you got another cat?
Yep, it's Maisie. She
Okay,
missed me this week, so she's been a little clingy.
Yeah, they either are pissed at you because you've left them and they ignore you, or they, they cling on you. Okay. Now, it is my understanding from Tom, because I wasn't here, that Kathy walked out the door and left a question for y'all to ponder.
You were the only one here, so.
What was the question? Because you've told me, and I don't.
Why did Jesus heal the blind man, even though he wasn't asked?
Yeah.
I think that was the question he left us with.
Why did Jesus heal the blind man, even though the blind man didn't ask? He wasn't seeking. He had accepted his lot in life. He was a beggar. And that kind of reminds me of the cripple at the pool. Jesus goes up to him and says, do you want to be healed? Although he was kind of asking for something. So why did Jesus heal the blind man?
Get another miracle in the Bible attributed to him?
Well, actually, that is possible. That John, in writing the stories,
Where is that?
John chapter 9.
John 9.
We're already on 9?
I went back
Yeah.
too far.
Well, no, we skipped from like 2 to 9.
No, we
What was
went
it,
from
4 to
5 to 9, I think.
Oh, so we still
Remember-
haven't done 6.
Well, remember, if we're following AJ's not doing the whole book.
It's doing the Monty Python thing, skip it.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm thinking Kathy got to about verse 8, 9, 10, somewhere in there. And Kathy, did you talk about the name of the pool of Siloam?
No, and we didn't talk about the blind man's parents.
Okay.
And I want to interject about why Jesus healed the blind man. Because I think Jesus was very purposeful in what he did. That it wasn't just chance. Oh, there's just some guy here, and
Right.
that there was a message, a meaning, a second and third level meaning.
Yeah,
That's what he did.
got all those little levels here. Okay, so some history about the pool. Jesus sent him to wash in the pool of Siloam. It was one of the landmarks of Jerusalem and was the result of one of the great engineering feats of the ancient world. The water supply of Jerusalem had always been precarious in the event of a siege. It came mainly from the Virgin's Fountain, or the spring Gihon, which was situated in the Kedron Valley, in other words, outside of the city walls. A staircase of 33 rock-cut steps led down to it, and there, from a stone basin, people drew the water. But it was completely exposed and could be completely cut off if, they were under siege. So when King Hezekiah, years before Jesus, realized that Sennacherib, who was, I think, an Assyrian king, was about to invade, he determined to cut through the solid rock a tunnel or conduit from the spring into the city. If the engineers had cut straight, it would have been a distance of 366 yards. So think almost 4 football fields. But they zigzagged, and archaeologists don't know if they were following a fissure in the rock, which would have made the digging easier, or if they were trying to avoid holy sites. But anyway, it actually ended up being 583 yards. So 6 football fields long, this conduit, to get the water from the pool into the city. The tunnel is in places only about 2 feet wide, but its average height is about 6 feet. The engineers began their cutting from both ends and met in the middle. Think about the
That's
technology.
impressive.
Yeah. And when I read this, if you ever travel Interstate 288, there's a place not too far from Midlothian where it's funny because they started from both ends, and when they got ready to meet, they weren't right. And so they had to swerve. And so there's a little place where the lanes don't follow the pavement. And that's why, because with our technology today and working above ground where we could see what we were doing, we can't start at either end and meet in the middle. So this reminded me of that. The pool was a place where the conduit from the Virgin's Fountain issued in the city. It was an open air basin 20 by 30 feet across, and that's how the pool got its name, because Siloam means sent. And so the water was sent from the pool outside into the city. And like John, there are multiple layers here. Jesus sent the man to the pool, and Jesus was sent. So the man washed and saw. So, like in chapter 5 with the crippled man, John takes his time telling us this happened on the Sabbath. And I'd really like to know, would there have been any uproar at all had this been on a different day? Would they still have gotten upset? Or do they just get upset because it's on the Sabbath? Any ideas?
Well, there was also the question, could a sinner do, because the question was Jesus a sinner?
Right.
And so the question of, could a sinner have done this healing?
Right. Of course, the blind man says no, because there's Old Testament scriptures that say, and can't think of the Barclay had several citations from the Old Testament where it says that God doesn't hear the prayers of sinners. God only hears the prayers of the righteous. And one of them, the Jews prayed with their hands out like this. And that in one verse, I think from Ezekiel, God says, if sinners are praying, I will not see your outstretched hands. I will not hear your voice. So the fact that God heard Jesus's prayer proved he was a righteous man. And that's how he was able to heal the blind man. That was what the blind man said. He has to be a good man, or God would not have heard his prayer. The assumption being, like on the Chosen. Are y'all watching the Chosen? Shane, watch the Chosen. Before Jesus heals in this series, he stops and he prays.
But that's not said in the gospel.
I
And
know, but there's a lot not said in the Gospels. So that was one.
I think the guy who was healed, he says that Jesus prayed when they come back the second time.
Okay. Boring and Craddock make the statement that the washing could be a reflection of Christian baptism. You know, we choose to be baptized, and this man did not have to obey Jesus's order to go and wash, but he does. He's given something to do, he does it, but the healing is still a gift, an act of grace, and not his achievement. The water from the sent one, by the water represented by Christ himself, again, the miracle happens off stage. Okay. Now comes the inevitable trouble. It was the Sabbath day. This is verses 13 through 16. So could somebody read those three verses for me?
13 through 16.
Yes, the four verses.
They brought to the Pharisees the man who was formerly blind. Now it was a Sabbath on the day when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also were asking him again how he received his sight. And he said to them, he applied clay to my eyes, and I washed, and I see. Therefore some of the Pharisees were saying, this man is not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath. But others were saying, how can a man who is a sinner perform such signs? And there was a division among them.
And remember that the Pharisees and other Jewish leaders have gotten down to the ultimate minutia of what constitutes breaking the Sabbath. So Jesus had broken Sabbath law 3 times in three different ways. By making clay, he was guilty of working on the Sabbath, even when the simplest acts constitute work, some of which are forbidden on the Sabbath. So here's some examples. A man may not fill a dish with oil and put it beside a lamp with the end of the wick in it. If a man extinguishes a lamp on the Sabbath to spare the lamp or the oil or the wick, he is culpable. A man may not go out on the Sabbath with sandals shod with nails, because, you're going to love this one, the weight of the nails would constitute a burden, and to carry a burden was to break the Sabbath. So you had to wear shoes that didn't have nails in them. A man might not cut his fingernails or pull out a hair of his head or his beard. So obviously, in the eyes of such a law, to make clay was to work. Secondly, it was forbidden to heal on the Sabbath. Medical attention could be given only if life was in actual danger. Even then, it must be only such to keep the patient from getting worse, not to make him any better. For instance, it is not permitted for anyone with a toothache to suck vinegar through his teeth. I guess that helps, I don't know. It was forbidden to set a broken limb. If a man's hand or foot is dislocated, he may not pour cold water over it. So obviously the blind man's life is not in danger, so healing him breaks that law of the Sabbath. And this is the one that really gets me. It was definitively written, as to fasting spittle, it is not lawful to put so much as upon the eyelids. I mean, that's how, you know, we know they were ridiculous, but they went so far as to say you can't spit and put it on somebody's eyebrow. So those are the 3 different ways he broke the Sabbath. The Pharisees are typical of the people in every generation, and we have all known them, who condemn anyone whose idea of religion is not theirs. They thought theirs was the only way of serving God, But some of them thought otherwise and declared that no one who did things that Jesus did could be a sinner. So they brought the man to the Pharisees. And so apparently this was not work for the Pharisees to have a meeting. I think all meetings are work. But they could meet, and it wasn't a
It's
formal
been, so it
court.
must be holy.
Right, yes, yes.
Because they have deemed it.
Yeah. So people took the blind man to the Pharisees and said, look at this, look at this. So I want to know who took him, because I'm not sure. Kathy, did you get the feeling that the Pharisees saw him and brought him into them, or did somebody else take him to the Pharisees?
I don't remember.
I don't know, it says, they brought to the Pharisees the man who was formerly blind.
Yeah, it doesn't say who they.
Mine says the neighbors.
Yeah, my footnote says neighbors and friends. Yeah.
But I mean, Jesus sent him out to go walk. You know,
All right,
Yeah.
so the neighbors were asking the blind man, so who was this guy? How did this happen? So I
Yeah.
guess word got to the,
yeah, I mean, Jesus.
yeah,
sent
and
him-
then they took the
Yeah,
man to the Pharisees in verse 13.
yeah,
Yeah, Jesus didn't say go hide and reveal yourself tomorrow. He's like,
yeah.
you know,
Go enjoy yourself.
go enjoy yourself and irritate the Pharisees.
So when the Pharisees asked him, I think it was Barclay, makes the statement that every time the blind man is asked who that was, his answer exhibits a higher and higher. The first time he said that man. The second time he calls Jesus a prophet. And the third time he said he recognizes Jesus as Lord and worships him. So it takes him a little while it takes all of us a little while. None of us meets Jesus and goes, I get it. I mean, I still don't get it. That's why I'm here. So, and when he was asked his opinion, he gave it without hesitation. In the Old Testament, a prophet was often tested by the signs he could produce. Moses proved to Pharaoh that he was a messenger by the signs and wonders he performed, and there are other examples. No doubt the man's thoughts were running on these things when he said that in his opinion, Jesus was a prophet. Whatever else, this was a brave man. He knew quite well what the Pharisees thought of Jesus. He knew quite well that if he came out on Jesus' side, he was certain to be excommunicated. But he made this statement and took his stand. It was as if he said, I am bound to believe in him. I am bound to stand by him because all he has done for me. So he's a great example. So the excommunication, okay, comes later. Okay, any other questions, comments on that bit of the passage? Okay, would somebody read verses 17 through 35?
Okay.
Okay, Tom, go for it.
So they said again to the blind man, what do you say about him? It was your eyes he opened. He said, he is a prophet. The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they called the parents, the man who had received his sight, and asked them, is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see? His parents answered, we know that this is our son and that he was born blind, but we do not know how it is that now he sees, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him. He is of age. He will speak for himself. His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews. For the Jews had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore, his parents said, "He is of age. Ask him." You said through 25?
35.
35, okay. So, for the second time, they called the man who had been blind, and they said to him, "Give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner." He answered, "I do not know whether he is a sinner. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see." They said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" Then they reviled him, saying, "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from." The man answered, "Here is an astonishing thing. You do not know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he does listen to one who worships him and obeys his will. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered him, "You were born entirely in sin, and are you trying to teach us?" And they drove him out. And one more. Jesus heard that they had driven him out, and when he found them, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?"
Um, Okay. Barclay says that John does a beautiful job of telling the story and makes the people come alive to us. Starting out with the blind man himself, he begins by being irritated at the persistence of the Pharisees. You asked me once, I told you. Why you bothered me again? Say what you like about this man. I don't know anything except him. But notice he's calling him a man first. All I know is I can see. And Barclay says it is the simple fact of Christian experience that many people may not be able to put into theologically correct language what they believe Jesus to be, but in spite of that, they can witness to what Jesus has done for their souls. Even when we cannot understand with our intellect, we can feel with our hearts. Then you have his parents, who are obviously uncooperative, but at the same time, they were afraid because they could be excommunicated. And there are two types of excommunication. There was the ban, Hebrew word was karim, I'm not sure which, by which a man was banished from the synagogue for life. In such a case, he was publicly denounced, he was cursed in the presence of the people, and he was cut off from God and from society. There was second way, there could be a sentence of temporary excommunication, which might last for a month or for some other fixed period. The terror of such a situation was that a Jew would regard it as shutting him out not only from the synagogue, but also from God. And that's why the man's parents answered that their son was quite old enough to be a legal witness and answer his own questions. And I know I have trouble with that idea because our culture is so different, and our belief system, that we've got a direct line to God. Nobody can shut me off from God, but they believed that God was only in the synagogue, was only in the temple,
In the Holy of Holies.
So why being shut out from the synagogue would that shut them away from God?
Well,
Or does it just shut them away from?
it shuts them away from God's residence. I'm sure they could still pray if they chose to, but they also believe that the priest, the rabbi, had to intercede for them. Kind of like, it's been 5 months since my last confession.
Yeah.
And that was the significance of the Holy of Holies being opened
Right.
at the crucifixion is that no one has to intercede for us anymore, but not everybody got the message.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the commentators makes the statement that John is combining pre-Easter events because he's writing this 90 years after the fact. And so during Jesus' time, it was not seen as either or. You got to choose Moses or Jesus. You know, Christianity was still a subset of Judaism. But by the time John is writing, they're starting to go their separate ways. And it is either or. Pick one or the other.
But I thought AJ's point was interesting about in verse 22, when his parents said that they knew that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue, that phrase "put out of the synagogue" is a word she says John made up, that apparently that's a word that's not found anywhere else.
Oh, okay.
So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah. Well,
They usually call it the temple.
But there were synagogues too, weren't there? In other places?
yeah, I thought so.
I may be wrong on that, but
Yeah, she said,
AJ also made the point about how the synagogues worked independently. So what happened at one sounded almost like the disciples, the disciples of Christ, that what happens at one church, how they do something may be different than how they do it at a different synagogue. So
yeah, I was thinking, they didn't have the technology to say, in this city or, we've excommunicated this man. He can just go around to another gate in the temple and nobody's going to know he's been excommunicated.
It says here that being put out of the synagogue, not the word synagogue, but being excommunicated was what John invented.
Yeah.
That we don't have any evidence of Jews expelling fellow Jews who proclaim Jesus to be
right.
Lord. Plus, every synagogue was independent, so you get put out of this one, you just go to a different one.
Right.
But maybe they didn't want to travel.
Say, getting, wasn't like you could hop on your bike or get in a car and get to one. It's like you might have to hike 20 miles. So,
Yeah. This is taking place in Jerusalem. Yeah, he could just go back home. Well, no, this probably is home. Okay. Okay, John can, going back to what I said about Judaism and Christianity were coming to a parting of the ways. John considers this to be a result of pressure from the Jewish side. Nonetheless, he insists that authentic faith must be confessed, that no one can have a purely personal, private Christian faith. And that's an interesting thought.
Kind of goes along with people today who talk about why they don't go to church.
Yeah.
I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. And maybe what John is saying is, you need to confess publicly your belief, and part of the whole Christian experience is the fellowship of believers, the community of believers that we belong to.
Yeah, just the last person that I talked to that is an unchurched person was churched. until somebody in the church said something to him that he said, no, I don't need to be here. So,
Unfortunately,
yeah,
Christianity gets a bad rap from the fact that humans are spreading.
yes, yes,
And that we make mistakes when we spread it.
yeah,
We spread a lot of judgmental attitudes
Yeah.
and thoughts as we spread it, or we try to proselytize what we think it means.
Yeah.
And if you don't believe that way, then there's something wrong with you.
yeah. I know. Back in the mid-'80s, my dad spent 13 weeks in the hospital. So on Sunday mornings, we were, in the hospital visiting because we all had jobs. And my sister's minister came to visit her in the waiting room because he spent a lot of his time in ICU back in the days when, you had a 2-hour window twice a day to visit. So I assumed he would go back to the church and tell the congregants, she's not here because her dad's in the hospital. But she said when she went back to church, what she got was, well, where have you been? A judgmental,
Mhm.
where have you been? And that was in 1984, 85, 86, somewhere in there. I don't think she's been back to church since. She Zooms here when she can, but yeah.
And I would second that because you just never know why a person is not there physically. I would be there every week if I weren't in this medical situation with our kid. And so it was interesting to me that I think Cindy thought that I had transferred membership to a different church.
Oh no.
So for years I had no contact, but I just wasn't able to get here. So
Yeah.
you just never know. It's important not to be judgy because
Right.
none of us has the full picture.
Right. Yeah, we should, the only thing about, why assume is spelled the way it does. Yeah,
Right.
we shouldn't assume things.
But that's one of the strengths of the disciple tradition is that it does attempt to embrace so many different opinions.
Yes.
And I think it's important that we try to go forward with that, especially when the country is so divided.
Yes.
It's interesting. And Jeff commented on it. As I've often talked about, my father was a very flawed man, very flawed. And yet thank you, he always went to church and still continued to live his life. But at his funeral, the minister made the comment, the death of Alan reminds me of how powerful God is. Because if he could save Alan Pickles, all of us are safe.
Okay.
Well, bless his heart.
Yeah.
So we just laughed and laughed over that. Yeah, if Dad got saved, we're all pretty safe.
That's another kind way of putting it too, probably. So.
Yeah. Okay.
But just, even ministers sometimes pass on a judgmental attitude or statement. And
Yeah, of course, in some cases, and I would think that would be one of them, it'd be kind of hard not to.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so we talked about the vivid characters, the man, the parents, and then there were the Pharisees. And they did not believe at first that the man had been born blind. They thought that maybe Jesus and this man had concocted this so that, Jesus could go, hey, look at what I've done. Because false prophets were warned against in the Old Testament that, they could lead susceptible people to false gods. And so the Pharisees are saying, no, you weren't blind. You just faked it. And So the Pharisees begin with suspicion and they try to browbeat the man. And where it says, give the glory to God, that's a phrase that is used kind of in a court situation. It's like, you're in court, you're swearing before God, so give the glory to God. And it was used in cross-examination, which really meant speak the truth in the presence and the name of God. So they were annoyed because they couldn't meet this man's argument. They're trying to tell him what he should be saying, and he's just not going along with it. And so he says, Jesus has done a wonderful thing. The fact that he has done it means God hears him, because God never hears the prayers of a bad man. So the blind man has a good biblical background, good theological explanation for what happened. And the Pharisees are going, but, no, we don't want it to be that way. I really love it when judgmental people are, brought up short. So they also believe that the prayer of a good person was always heard. So what do the Pharisees do when they are met with this argument? First, they resort to abuse. They heaped abuse on him. Then they start insulting him. They accuse the man of being born in sin, prenatal sin. I have no idea how they thought such a thing could exist.
Would that go back to verse 2, when Jesus' disciples said to him about the blind man, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? That whole debate that apparently there are places in the Old Testament say it explicitly, but then there are also places that it says, that's not how it works.
And remember how they thought that the sin was passed down from generation to generation to the third and fourth and fifth. So maybe that's how you get prenatal sin. I don't know. I've never understood it.
Yeah.
But you'll still hear people today.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, and
what did this person do to
yeah.
deserve this type of thing?
This illness, this
Yeah.
tragedy.
But
Why did God do this to
Yeah.
them? Type of
Well,
thing.
but I kind of, to shift it, and I'm going to trust my sister doesn't watch this. She made a bad decision in terms of her first husband, and there was mental illness in his family that she didn't know about. And so that mistake, not a sin, but that mistake has been visited to her children who have issues of their own, which led them to have issues in their parenting, which has led them to not know how to. So I'm seeing that mistake having ramifications generation after generation after generation. So I have wondered, just with that one incident, if that's not sin, but mistakes, actions have consequences.
I agree. And I don't know about the analysis of that decision, but that's what I said the other week. I clearly think that what they're talking about is the effects of genetics. That's really what we would call it today, maybe.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know my dad's side of the family, his dad was an alcoholic. Not that my dad would ever admit it, apparently, but he had at least two of his brothers were alcoholics. My dad was the oldest, and he took the opposite approach. There wasn't going to be any alcohol in the house at all.
And that's my approach.
Yeah.
I don't take a drink.
Yeah.
Well, my dad did the same thing. His dad was an alcoholic, and he died clean, but he was in a men's shelter that helped him stay clean. But yeah, he ruined his life.
Yeah.
With it.
My
And my
uncles
dad didn't
beat it, but they, I think in their 20s and 30s, they had
Yeah,
pretty
well,
bad issues.
Yeah. My dad didn't, I can't say he didn't drink when he was younger, but he had more respect for the power of alcohol than anybody I've ever known. It was like, in a restaurant, I can order this one drink. It was never, ever in their home. But at a restaurant, I think it was, I can order one drink and have it. But he said he liked the way it made him feel, where I hate it. I hate that feeling. So yeah.
Well, around that stuff, whether it's genetic or
And I think it
behavioral
is,
or a combination of both,
but I
you know,
think
it does pass.
Yeah,
through.
I think it is genetic because there's some biochemistry, organic chemistry thing happening in those people that doesn't happen in me.
Yeah.
That keeps you from processing alcohol the way other people
Yeah.
can, and it turns into a craving
Yeah,
for whatever.
my
it is.
problem is with chocolate.
It's really not a problem.
I'm starting to have stomach issues, and I've read somewhere that chocolate can irritate your stomach. So it is
Oh,
starting to be
yeah.
a problem.
Oh, well, I
But
don't
it
think
does-
it's dark chocolate.
I don't know, but anyway, but yeah, at least chocolate doesn't change my behavior. Maybe the craving of it
It
does.
might if somebody got between me. and my chocolate.
Well, and in the mental health community, the whole, during the course of my career, there was a big shift in how addiction was viewed as far as, when I first started out, it was pretty common to think that that was a character flaw,
Right.
that it was a moral issue that and now the dominant thinking is that this is a disease that you have to learn how to manage, much like you do diabetes.
Yeah.
So there's been a huge shift in our society on that.
Yeah.
And like Laura's saying, and our understanding of a lot of issues that, in biblical times they were trying to sort out too, I think. Trying to understand. And so if you've got a family that has a genetic issue of, there's several forms of muscular dystrophy that are genetic, and so you have multiple generations that have it. And so, to blame the victim, oh, you did something wrong, can be a way to try to understand it.
Yeah, but blame is such a zero-sum game. Blame doesn't really ever get us anywhere. It's just a waste
No.
of energy, and it creates
Right.
such hard feelings, and it's a misinterpretation of the real situation. And it's
Right.
a bad analysis. So I don't have much time for blame.
And no. And thank goodness now we know so much more about how the human body works.
Yeah.
Well, we know a little bit more.
Yeah, there's still a lot of unknowns. You're right. There's still a lot of unknowns.
We've been told part of why we've had such trouble getting good medical treatment is we're still beyond the frontier of where the knowledge base has arrived, So, yes, we know more, but when you said that about how the mental health field had evolved just in the course of your career, from the blaming, I thought, well, we're really not that far from the Jews in the story saying, who sinned, this man or his parents?
Right.
I mean, we may be getting a little bit farther along the road, but for all the years that have gone by, I wouldn't call that significant progress.
Yeah, the world's not all perfect, that's for sure.
Mm-mm.
We got a lot more work to do.
Yeah, 2 steps forward and 1 step back.
And
Yeah.
sometimes reverse.
Yeah.
1 step forward and 2
2
step.
step back. Yeah. Okay. So Barclay talks about, let me just read this. Often we have our differences with people, and it is well that it should be so. But the moment insult and abuse and threat enter into an argument, it ceases to be an argument and becomes a contest in bitterness. If we become angry and resort to wild words and hot threats, all we prove is that our case is disturbingly weak. Jesus came into this world for judgment. Whenever people are confronted with Jesus, they at once pass a judgment on themselves. If they see in Jesus nothing to desire, nothing to admire, nothing to love, then they have condemned themselves. If they see in Jesus something to wonder at, something to respond to, something to reach out to, then they are on the way to God. Those who are conscious of their own blindness and who can long to see better and to know more are men and women whose eyes can be opened and who can be led more and more deeply into the truth. Those people who think they know it all, the Pharisees, Those who do not realize that they cannot see are men and women who are truly blind and beyond hope and help. Only those who realize their own weakness can become strong. Only those who realize their own blindness can learn to see. Only those who realize their own sin can be forgiven. So that's from Barclay. Because John does this kind of wordplay with telling the Pharisees they're blind. And they're saying, wait a minute, what do you mean? We're not blind, we can see. So yeah, you can see with your eyes, but not your heart. And the blind man could see with his heart. His. So, any comments? Questions?
Hey, I'm in Sunday school, how are you that?
Okay, I will read the last little bit here. And I'm gonna start with 35. Jesus heard that they had driven him out, and when he found him, so they came and got the man, but without Jesus. Jesus heard that they had driven him out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered, "And who is he, sir? Tell me so that I may believe in him." Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." He said, "Lord, I believe." And he worshiped him. Jesus said, "I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees near him heard this and said to him, "Surely we are not blind, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would not have sinned, but now that you say we see, your sin remains." And one of the commentators said, because the Pharisees knew so much, their sin was greater. You know, if they'd been ignorant, you couldn't, you know, to use Laura's word, you couldn't blame them. They don't know any better.
Ignorance is bliss.
Ignorance is bliss, yes. Well, the Pharisees were not ignorant. They knew and should have seen. So,
Having the power and control, maintaining that and getting that power and control was more important.
yeah. So I've never understood people who wanted power. You know, it's the last thing on earth I want. Go away, leave me alone. But you know, people then, people today, I guess people throughout history, that's what wars are. Gimme.
So almost to the point, literally, of selling your soul to be powerful.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes we reject what's right in front of our eyes in order to have an earthly power.
Yeah.
In reality.
And this is just temporary.
Yeah. As my grandma used to say. You know, store what's eternal, not what's here.
Yeah.
Rust and thieves and everything can get it. Like,
Yeah.